Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to AA Media. Today I have the pleasure to have with me Professor Jonathan Dyke, my professor for negotiation, and we're excited to talk about that topic today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Albi. Appreciate it.
Yes, so Professor, you've had 25 years of building successful companies. You've been CTO, you've been CEO, and you're also teaching negotiation at Vanderbilt University. From your experience throughout, how would you define negotiation? Because I think that's the first misconception that a lot of people have, including myself coming into your class, is not having a clear definition of what is negotiation.
Well, I think it's really a life skill that most people don't develop until later in their career. So, for example, I have a lot of guest speakers that come in, and the phrase I hear most often is I wish I would have had this when I was in college. And so I think, negotiation is just a conversation between people trying to get to an agreement. So you probably experience it, on a daily basis with where do you want to go to dinner? Where do you want to go on spring break? Should we rent this Airbnb versus that Airbnb? That's all negotiation. And then as you progress in your career, you'll find yourself, regardless of your role in an organization, for-profit, nonprofit, doesn't really matter. You'll find yourself in different types of negotiations. So it's important to understand the fundamentals of it.
I see. Another interesting point that you make in your class is that negotiation, as much as about it is for winning and getting the better deal, it's also about maintaining relationship, which is a dimension that I never thought of before that when I would step into conversation or deals.
That relationship building is probably the most important thing about successful negotiations. As you get older and more experience in your career, the world gets smaller. And you see, especially with social media and LinkedIn, you have thousands and thousands of people in your network. And so you're bound to come across them again. And so it's really important that you develop these relationships because successful negotiations are built on trust. And trust takes a lot of time to build. It can slip away in an instant. Takes a lot of time to build, so it's very important. So, for example, I had a guest speaker this morning from healthcare private equity, and she was talking about a negotiation that they're having right now, and it's a down round for the company, which is very distressful and unfortunate, but it's a reality. And we were talking about the importance of the relationships among the members of the board and the fact that they were strong relationships. So that really helped the company and then the investor group come to terms with what is a challenging situation. And that takes a lot of time and effort to cultivate those relationships. I talk to my classes all the time that you should start building your network now, especially as Vanderbilt students, because there's, if you think about it as an asset, when you buy a car for the first time, when you drive off the lot or Carvana drops it off or whatever, it starts to decline in value immediately. When you're building your network, it's always growing in value. And so with proper care and feeding and the good, smart use of LinkedIn, there's a lot of value that can be created there for you as an individual.
Interesting. And especially at Vanderbilt, where we find a lot of like-minded people, it's an environment that I'm constantly surprised of all the quality people that we have. And I think not taking an advantage or an opportunity into developing those relationships that you mentioned is truly a missed chance. And I think one other thing that I've learned in your class is that when it comes to negotiation, not necessarily you need to get the bigger slice of the pie, but you need to focus more on creating a bigger pie so that also the other people who are interested in that could get a better deal. And it kind of connected with this other idea that I learned from 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, that you should always think in terms of win-win, because that's the longest term successful route to take.
That's true. So in the course, we start with pretty simple negotiations that are transactional. There's not much value to be created. It's, for example, buying a house. You're the seller, I'm the buyer. I make an offer, you respond to it, and we go back and forth, and then we make an agreement. In general, most negotiations are all about creating value. And as you said yourself, expanding the pie, growing the pie. And that takes more time and energy. It takes relationships, it takes trust. But ultimately, that's the marker of a successful negotiation, is the fact that you're able to invest that time and energy to surface issues. So you'll probably remember kind of the concept of issues from your counterparty. So what's really important to you, Albi? Here's what's important to me. And putting our heads together, maybe we can figure out how to make 2 + 2 = 5 or 6, versus just kind of looking at what's on the page. So it's all about finding additional value that may not be right in front of you. And then, as I said before, that just takes a little bit more time and energy.
Yes, and communication becomes a big part of it too. Medium of the communication, tone, body language. We've touched a little bit on this podcast regarding that area, but I'm just curious to hear from you from a business perspective, how important is kind of like the form of your speech when you're in negotiation to get the better deal?
So in our course, we spend a lot of time talking about personalities and your ability and your counterparty's ability to handle and manage conflict. Most people think that negotiations have to be, head to head and full of conflict and maybe loud and in some cases violent. That's not the case at all. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is surface your party's interests. And to do that, you have to be patient and you have to have methods, which are, some are innate in your personality, some are learned. So we use the TKI survey instrument to understand what biases we may have in our own personalities. That also gives me the ability to evaluate you as I'm sitting across from you, being like, okay, here's the way that I think Albi is perceiving what I'm saying. Maybe I need to try a different tone of voice. Clearly, if you're in a meeting and there are people sitting across from you with their arms crossed, they're not paying attention, they're looking at your phone, you probably have an engagement problem. And so you need to come up with methods to change that. And it could be, let's take a break. I'm going to buy everybody coffee down in the lobby at Starbucks. Let's reconvene tomorrow. Sleep on it, doing different things to try to get the engagement levels back up. But tone of voice, body language, very, very important. And ultimately showing concern and care for the counterparty, because at the end of the day, you're dealing with humans. Even in the most transactional of transactions, they're still people, and they're there for a reason, and you have to respect that.
That's interesting you mentioned the personality part, because I vividly remember taking the TKI test and then realizing that there's basically 5 ways of kind of proceeding into a negotiating, being competing, compromising, collaborating, avoiding, and accommodating.
Good work. Good A+ there. Good work.
Recall is, I actually researched it, so it's not that much of a recall. But mine was competing, and then the second one was collaborating. And I remember when I stepped into buying the house, I think my counterpart was more collaborating and less competing. So trying to use that competitiveness not necessarily was the best procedure, but being aware that that's my default of negotiating helped me kind of readjust and reshape not my personality, but my take on the case, and find that middle ground of collaboration with my partner.
Exactly. And so I'm looking at the podcast booth here. There's a soundboard. So think of it as a soundboard. You're moving some dials up and some dials down, depending on the type of negotiation, depending on the TKI preferences of the counterparty. And so it's not a one size fits all. Just because you're competing, you need to be self-aware of that. you'll use that in some negotiations or at a certain time in a negotiation, but you're really using all of these different levers. And it's not a perfect instrument, but it covers, probably 98% of all personality types. So it's simple enough to have in your back pocket, to have in your mind when you're sitting down for the first time and you're like, okay, here's what I'm dealing with. There are 5 people that make up the counterparty. I need to evaluate each one and really understand what they're going to be like during this conversation. And as you can imagine, that takes time and energy and kind of your brain, but successful negotiators do that. And I think one of the things that you hear a lot about negotiation is, I'll just wing it.
Yeah.
I'll split the difference, all these different kind of things. That is not the case at all. This is a science. It's proven. Sure, some people may be better at it than others, just like some people are better at math than others. But in this case, it is a learned set of skills and behaviors. And once you develop those and then practice those, so experience is what makes you more successful because you've just seen more reps of different scenarios. That's how you get really good at it. But it is for sure a learned discipline that I think everyone should at least understand the basics of to have a successful business career.
I really loved that you mentioned that because I think that was my biggest takeaway, and the message that I want to send out is that you're not necessarily born being good at negotiation, but you can get good at it if you practice and if you learn the main concept. And personally, I'm from an engineering background, so normally I wouldn't think that I'm the best business skills oriented person, but then I realized learning the concept of ZOPA, like zone of potential agreements, and then BATNA, best alternative to the negotiation deal, and using those 2 concepts into the negotiation, I realized that I was becoming better and better, and the cases were like also proving that just by approaching it in a very systematic way. So it's not necessarily something that's inherently built, but it's something that is being taught. With that said, I still am a little bit confused on the part of how do you go about learning the best way how to negotiate? I think still there's a barrier of doing practices and being bad at it to the point where you get good at it, as opposed to like learning a lot of the material and then stepping on the first negotiation. I'm kind of interested, what do you think about this concept of action versus learning, and which one should come first?
Well, I think it's not to have a cop-out answer, but it's a do both, right? So think of it as building blocks. There's 2 sides to your learning skills, you're understanding the environment that you're in, you're applying those skills, and you're practicing and getting better and better over time. You're getting more comfortable with yourself, but you're also seeing more personality types. You're seeing more variety in negotiation type, like really simple, cut and dry, like buying a house, or Abraham Path, which is about solving peace in the Middle East, which is obviously highly complex and volatile. So over time, you're understanding those fundamentals, which we cover in the course, but then you're adding kind of layers of expertise on top of that. Preparation is the number one, probably missed opportunity that I would say negotiators, again, that's back to the I'll just figure it out when I get there. That doesn't work. So you need to, before the negotiation at the table starts, you need to have done a lot of work to understand what you're walking into, and you need to have 7 or 8 moves on the chessboard ready to go based on what responses you're getting from the counterparty. So there's the preparation piece, there's discipline. So stick to your plan unless there's new information that forces you to call an audible. Stick to your playbook until you get new information that puts you kind of in forces you to move in a different direction. And the third thing is patience. And I think there's in today's world, everyone is very hurried and looking for immediate solutions, but the more patient you can be, remember we talked about the awkward silence, how effective that is.
Yep. And I think that's important because sometimes we feel the need to fill in that silence with words, and quite often that silence is broken with unnecessary information, or we might unintentionally give our best interest in the case. So sometimes really silence is the best part, as you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was just trying to get some silence going here, which is very difficult. It's like we've got our headphones over here, and it's like, it's hard.
It's hard.
That was like 5 seconds. So those are all back to kind of the practice and the learned skills. That's something that can be simple but very effective if you know how to use it.
Interesting. And I think every time I talk to you about these concepts, even though like I've learned them before, there's always new nuances, or there's always new kind of takeaways that you can form and shape them into communication or into negotiation. So I also wanted to touch on other things that I've learned from your class. The idea of anchoring, setting a high price for something that you want to, let's say, buy, or low price relative to what you want, and then dropping that to something more rational. It seems to have the effect of people being more open to your second option. An example that I found this in myself is that if you go to like a Starbucks or like a, let's say, drinking beverage like store, and you see the extra large is like, let's say, $10 or $12, but then you see the medium being kind of $6, it sounds immediately that the $6 is better. But if you just were presented with the option of $6 for the medium, then you're still evaluating whether that's a bad or good deal. And you're the first one that I learned this from, and I've been using it continuously in my kind of day-to-day life, and it's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, I think the roots of this are founded in economic theory about choices that people make. And, you have the coffee example, small, medium, or large, different price points. I'm going to go in the middle. So there's predictable behavior when you give, humans or certain segments of humans different types of choices. The anchoring is all about how do you begin a negotiation, and the parties have a decision to make if they're coming to the table, or starting in whatever virtual format they may be in, starting a negotiation where the question is, if you have a lot of information about the counterparty and where you think this is going to go, then you should make the first move. You should set the anchor. If you're walking into it and it's a virtual unknown kind of, you need to collect more information, then you should not set the anchor. And the anchor is not always about setting something high and then getting them off of it, or low and then getting them off of that. From kind of a shock value standpoint, it's because that's subjective too, especially if there's no practical third-party data that substantiates your claim. Like real estate's easy because you can just get on Zillow and it's like, look, here are the comps for the neighborhood, and you coming in and wanting to lowball me on the price of my house, like I'm not going to take that. A lot of times there's anchoring around issues. And what you're doing by anchoring the issues is you're setting the priority of the issues when you're negotiating a whole series of issues. And as you'll recall, you kind of group those issues together, you bundle them. And so you may begin with an issue-based negotiation that's less about financial to begin with. You may anchor with those because to you, that's where the conversation should go first. So it's really just thinking about, do you need to wait and hear what they have to say? Or do you feel like you have enough information where you can make the first move, and that's setting the anchor?
Setting the anchor. And then after that anchor is set, I'm sure there's always a lot of back and forth. So navigating that back and forth becomes an important part as well. Another thing that we learned through the display of Chris Voss videos, Chris Voss being a former FBI hostage agent, was the usage of mirroring, which is repeating back the words that you said to kind of like have the other party start talking more. Labeling, which I think, in my opinion, is the most powerful one. When somebody's mad, you just say, it sounds like you're mad, and that kind of negates it. And then the voice that you mentioned before we're like starting to record, the downflexion and upflexion. How do you see, at least yourself, when you're negotiating deals or when you're in business conversation using these kind of concepts, and how well have they served you?
I think mirroring and labeling are universally accepted and understood and are incredibly valuable. And once you practice it a little bit, then it can be a tool, lifelong tool. You need to be careful not to wear it out to where the counterparty's like,
why is he doing this?
Like it can be a little, insincere, but that's all part of, the practice. And in a heated conversation, when you're mirroring someone and essentially, repeating, like what they're saying back to you, there are lots of different examples of it, but you're just creating an opportunity for them to talk more. And then, like you said, you can put a label on it, which is like packaging it up. And psychologically, that organizes information in a way that allows you to progress in the conversation. So it's actually, it's very healthy. The voice inflections, I always I think the best negotiators are typically cool and just kind of like, and so, they don't get flustered. They're even keel. So I think the voice inflection, especially if you're, maybe if you're virtual and you're not in person, I think that can be helpful. In business negotiations, I think you generally want to have a calm demeanor, a productive attitude, a productive voice. I don't think raising your voice, or unless you're at the kind of end of your rope, end of the line, creates any value whatsoever. But yeah, Chris Voss is a master at that. And he's also working on, major life and death negotiation situations, which is a little bit different than most business or personal negotiations.
Totally. Professor, a little bit away from the negotiation class, you being a lecturer at Vanderbilt, you seem like to have a lot of other involvements that I don't know how you balance and like how you manage. You're the CEO of FutureSelf Networks as well. And I was wondering, how has that been for you? And if you can talk a little bit about your day-to-day job and how does that feel when in comparison to teaching?
So teaching is a primary effort, a big allocation of time, and something I love to do. I love to be in the classroom with students. We introduced something new this semester. There's a thing called Term Sheet. It's an email newsletter that comes out from Fortune magazine, and it lists all the venture capital deals and the private equity deals. So we start class each day with that in both of my classes, and it creates an instant interactive kind of cool. Everyone's read it. Let's be honest, probably. Some people have read it. I don't know how many people have read it, but it still works when we're able to talk about business issues, and it surfaces a bunch of new things that aren't part of negotiation or aren't part of business development. So I love that interaction, and I learn just as much, and I learn with my students through that process, which is a lot of fun. Outside of the classroom, I do have the consulting firm is Ideascape, which started as FutureSelf Network, and then it split into two different organizations. One is an app for high school students to help them. It's basically a co-pilot app to help them figure out what to do after high school, especially if college is not a good option. So it kind of just guides them through a bunch of information and can be very, very helpful, where they may not be getting that from a college counselor or a career counselor at whatever, educational environment or home environment that they're in. Ideascape is a consulting organization, and we help, companies of different sizes grow through sales. So it's more of a understanding how your sales force is organized, what technology are you using, and then trying to help you figure out where the rough spots are so that you can then grow faster and better. So those are kind of two things. And then I consult with other companies that are trying to grow mainly through this sales consulting. And then we've just started a new squash league, professional squash league.
I saw that in your LinkedIn.
Which is pretty cool, where we have the top players in the world playing team events, where we did a draft last weekend in Nashville, where all the top players came in. There's 4 players per team. There's 6 teams representing cities around the country, and then they'll play, and then we'll have kind of the Super Bowl of squash in Philadelphia at the Spectre Center in June. And so that's been a completely new enterprise for me, project for me, developing new skills, not really knowing what I'm doing or what we're doing as a team, but it's so far so good. And that kind of, opportunity doesn't come along every day. And so I wanted to, even if it was way outside of my comfort zone, wanted to jump on it. And it seems like, we've got a good opportunity there.
Try it out. Interesting. Yeah. You mentioned sales, and that just reminded me of Alicia's club, Van Dien Sale. Shout out if she's watching, and you're also the advisor of that. It seems like sometimes negotiation and sales have a lot of common denominator, and one of them is empathetic listening, which we mentioned in the info session. Another thing is being able to have an authentic voice into what is your interest, and also keeping the other party's interest. How do you kind of differentiate the two, or do you think they go hand in hand in most cases?
They definitely go hand in hand. I would say that, it's really the fundamental concept is persuasion. And the negotiation aspect of that is a little bit further down the line, where you actually have a negotiation, where business development or sales, there's a lot of work that goes into getting to the negotiation. So you can kind of pull apart the supply chain a little bit there of the conversations, but business development is all about, getting someone interested in what you have to offer, engaging them in an authentic way, listening to their needs. So there's commonalities for sure with the techniques of negotiation. At some point, there will probably be a negotiation because you're offering something, they're interested in buying it, and so you need to talk about the terms and conditions of that opportunity. And so you could say that negotiation is a subset of business development. It's kind of in that process, and ultimately they have a lot of the same concepts that are foundational, like you said. The ability to listen, the ability to put your ego aside, to listen and then respond with value, create more value, solve a problem. Those are all just kind of innate to, the concepts of business development as well as negotiation.
Nice. I like that. For a final question, I'm interested because you're also attended Vanderbilt, if I'm correct, for your undergrad.
Yep.
How do you think people now that are going through the college, how do you think they should focus their time into developing skills? And do you think that has changed from the time that you were in college?
I think there's more information now available. That's kind of an obvious statement, to college students than when I was in college, right? So I think we were focused on what was in front of us, which is all we could really see. And so, for example, we didn't register for classes online. I did my senior year. I lived off campus, and I connected into the computer system because I was kind of a computer geek. And all my friends came over to register online for the first time. And so that just shows you the state of technology when we were in college. So, we were, primarily in liberal arts majors. So a lot of history majors, a lot of English majors, anthropology, which, you don't see as much of, plenty of econ majors, plenty of HOD majors. And we didn't have a business minor. And so, my main advice to students is to try to figure out what you want to do with your life after Vanderbilt, by experiencing things, knowing that some of those things will just help you identify what you don't want to do, right? You're trying to figure it out. I get really frustrated when a student, a first year, comes in and says, I want to go do this. I'm like, that's great, but there's a whole world out there that you should explore before you just narrow your single thread it to that thing, because you may think you like it, but you don't know until you try it. And then if you try it and you've been single threading it, then you don't have anything else. And then you have to start kind of flat footed versus look at lots of different things, and you can prioritize things, create a map. I've got this methodology that we talk about in class. It's new for this semester, where you map all this out. You're moving things around. You're building a network. Part of building that network is learning. So you're going out to coffee with people. You're asking them questions. You're filling out your map. And then ultimately you need to get a job and earn income. And it may not be the best job ever, but it's a job, it's an experience, and you're starting the process. And so just be open to new ideas. That's why we do the term sheet review every morning in class, is to look at all of these cool companies that are out there that you could go be a part of. And I don't think students realize how much is out there, and it's my job to get them to see it. Then they choose what they want to do. But ultimately, I think the more options you can get on the table for yourself, the better off you're going to be.
Awesome. On that note, thank you so much for all the valuable insights, Professor. It's been a true pleasure, and it's really always an honor speaking to you. I'm excited for the people who are going to watch this episode and see their thoughts, and I hope we'll stay in contact in the future as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me today.